Good evening or afternoon to everyone from wherever you may be viewing or when you may be viewing. I am Rabbi Mark Cohn, National Program Coordinator for the North American Values Institute, and I'm honored to moderate today's webinar, which we cleverly titled, When Math Doesn't Add Up, an examination of math instruction with its pitfalls and potentials. Friends, I am way out of my league here. The last time I was in math class was in Math 2 in my undergraduate studies, which I took to fulfill a statistics requirement. It was logic, and actually I loved it. We had a great teacher. The chalkboards, which indeed were chalkboards, were filled with equations and excitement by the end of the hour, and somehow I managed to still get an A. I actually love numbers, and in Jewish life, we play a lot with Hebrew and numerical values of numbers. Now, that is a completely separate webinar and lesson which I would only be too happy to address at a separate time. I'm out of my league here because I'm not actually in any math classroom. My children have actually already graduated from college, and I am not a policymaker, an analyzer, or a shaper. And I'm sitting with 4 people who are in the classroom, have children, and or work with children, are in public schools, and know a lot about policy history, implementation, and needs. I've been selected to moderate because A, that's part of my job at Navi, but most importantly, because this panel tonight and I share, and Navi is deeply engaged with what happens when critical social justice ideology, teacher activism, and misguided ideas constrict and limit, restrain and prevent students in the K-12 schools from obtaining vital learning and critical skills for an adequate numeracy so that our country can have an educated citizenry. I just want to repeat that. The North American Values Institute is deeply engaged with what happens when critical social justice ideology, teacher activism, and misguided ideas constrict and limit, restrain, and prevent students in the K-12 schools from obtaining vital learning and critical skills for adequate numeracy so that our country can have an educated citizenry. Now, we are joined tonight by not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 outstanding panelists. So it will be, in my part, in no small part, a job to keep the conversation going and flowing and somehow balanced by this thoughtful group. So if I cut anyone off, it's not to be rude, it's just to stay on track. And folks who are at home watching or watching online, there is our comment section that you can drop questions in, and I'll do my very best to monitor that, and we'll watch to answer what we can. So by way of introduction, I felt an immediate kinship with each of our guests tonight because I'm originally from the Bay Area in Northern California and went to school for undergraduate in Southern California. So if nothing else, I'm familiar with the geography of where our guests are. Mani Delgado is a math teacher at the Menlo Atherton High School. He has taught high school for 28 years and works on both teaching his students math and combating the one-size-fits-all approach, where no students fail, all pass, and all get placed into the same level of math regardless of skill, knowledge, or background. Michael Malione is a parent and an independent STEM enrichment tutor to students in California's Piedmont Unified School District. He founded SaveMath.net to spread awareness of the new California math framework, and he sits on the school board for the Piedmont Unified School District. Sugi Sorenson is a co-founder and director of policy for the Institute for Mathematics Instruction, a national think tank with the mission to improve pre-college mathematics instruction in the United States. By day, he is a senior systems engineer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and by night, Sugi also teaches mathematics for a private math enrichment firm in the Los Angeles suburb of La Cañada, Flint Ridge. Lastly, Allyson Rosen is a PhD, board-certified clinical neuropsychologist who performs research on the cognitive neuroscience of mental illness and brain degeneration using clinical assessment, brain imaging, and stimulation in her academic work. Now, she became active in math education as a parent when she saw how academic testing was being misused to hold back her daughter in math. Over the years, she brought together other parents and STEM professionals to promote ethical and evidence-based best practices in math education. So thank you all so very much for being here, to our friends who are online, who are watching. What I'm going to do, we're going to start off, Mani, with you. And what I'd love for you to do to get us started is say, look, you've been teaching for roughly 30 years. Take us into an algebra class in 2000 as opposed to 2025. What are the things that are different? Where do you find kind of those constrictions or limits for you? What are you finding in your classrooms?
Well, first of all, thank you, Mark, for having me and for being part of this panel. I will first say that probably there aren't other teachers here right now because they either believe in some of the ideology that you sort of described, or they're just afraid. I started actually teaching math in 2009. I was a computer teacher before that. But even before that, what I noticed, because I was part of the school in a different department, but still noticing what was happening, was that in recent years, before there was sort of a tracking mechanism in place where, you know, kids who were really low level would go into a pre-algebra class, or if they fell into an algebra class, there were even different levels within the algebra class, like proficient, below basic, far below basic. There were actually 3 levels of algebra classes. Geometry had 2 levels, at grade level or enriched if they were a little bit more advanced. Mm-hmm. And that's been gone away for the past, I would say, 10 years or so, I would say. The other thing that I've noticed is no more math requirements for science classes. So believe it or not, if you're teaching chemistry, or all the chemistry science classes in high school are being, in my opinion, destroyed simply because, you know, in chemistry, when I was in high school, you needed at least algebra 2 so that you could actually teach the subject matter necessary to be able to advance to physics and higher level science. That's not the case anymore. Everybody gets into biology freshman year, and everybody gets into chemistry, I believe, second year, and so forth. So there's no grade level requirements, no math requirements, so forth. So a lot of teachers are stuck with kids who may not know how to do fractions and so forth in a chemistry class. The other major thing that I've seen is, I got 4 things basically. This is the third one. The third one is they've gotten rid of all special need classes. So before, if you were a student and you had some learning disabilities, you would be put into a class that was appropriate for your disabilities. Now they do not do that. They just throw you into the same class. They try to give you some supports, but a lot of times it's not realistic, not for all students. Now, some students can. I'm not going to say that's not that every student can handle it. Some students find it very difficult. And so teachers are forced to basically water down course material so that they can, these kids with special needs can keep up with the general population. The fourth thing that I've seen is the biggest one, which I deal with daily, is not teaching the basics. The movement has been on, and the only thing I can think of why they're pushing this is to find it easier for kids to be able to pass. And so all the foundational level math, they're sort of giving you this Common Core word problem kind of material where the teacher can lecture. If you walk in, the teacher looks like he or she is very bright. But in the end, if you really take a closer look, the kids are not really mastering anything really. And they give partial credit. The answer doesn't have to be exactly correct. You get graded based on your attempts, stuff like that. That's what I've seen. And also the grading scale across the board in all public, all subject matters. What I've seen is now the grading scale is dropped. Like, so 80% to 100 is an A, 60 to 80 is a B, and so forth, going down 20% levels per grade. So they're just passing kids on, essentially, is what I've seen.
This may seem a silly question. Who does that serve? How does it help? I mean, because what I'm imagining is in the chemistry class, if we had a chemistry teacher here, you know, one of your coworkers, what do you think the chemistry teacher, the physics teacher would be saying right now? What are they seeing?
Well, remember, these teachers now fall into the same ideology. In their view, in their head, they saying, well, everything is fine. I can still teach the material. But are they really getting down to the advanced, knowledge of sciences, let's say, to be able to really push their students to one day become STEM career, have careers in STEM? I would say no, they wouldn't. They would be making disservice to their students. They believe in the ideology. They believe that everybody should be included. They believe that they can get by with whatever they're dealt with, but they don't realize themselves that they have slowly been watering down sort of the science fields, the science courses, and so forth.
So I'm going to table a topic that I suspect Sugi and Michael will pick up a little later. One of the topics or concepts that I came up when I was looking and getting ready for this evening is this concept of learning concept over procedure. Because it sounds like in more traditional math, Manny, when you kind of probably came out of teacher college and learning and getting started, learning procedures was what mattered the most. That you have to base that above and beyond concept or at the same time as concept. Are you finding that you're unable to teach some of that procedural method, the memorization? Is that how do you work that into your classwork?
Well, I'm battling it right now. I don't follow along with what the district is sort of feeding everybody. I don't know how many teachers are behind closed doors shutting the door, because they do realize that after a while it's not working. Okay. The kids are not able to do, I'm getting kids into my 9th grade class that do not know how to add, subtract, divide, or multiply integers. So after a while, well, how can you actually get them to, what they're starting to discover is, how can you ask a word problem that says, write the equation, when the student doesn't even know how to solve an equation, much less know how to add and subtract and so forth. So I think it's starting to come full circle. Okay. And starting to become reality. But yeah, I fight them every day. The biggest thing that they're really been pushing in the last also 10 years, I forgot to mention this, is they want everything done in groups. They want student talk, away from teacher-centered instruction, and making it all student helping each other. Students are sort of breaking down the math problem, and there being groups of 4 or 3. And what ends up happening in my experience is that group work is not really a positive thing at the lower levels, because one kid will do all the problem and the other kids will just, copy it down and make it seem like they're understanding and they're learning, when in reality they have not. Math is to be done as a skill, has to be done individually, and you have to demonstrate the mastery of that. And that's what's been gone for sure.
Great. Thank you, Manny. I'm going to pause you right here. We're going to have time, please, God, for some question and answer later, in which we might pull on you. I'm going to bring onto our stage here, we're going to meet Allyson Rosen, who's coming both as someone who's a clinical neuropsychologist, but also a parent. And I know you have a presentation that you wanted to share. So just give me 1 second and I will go ahead and line that up for you.
Yeah, I tried to say everything I wish I'd known in 5 minutes. So
we might even give you 6.
It goes fast.
All right. Go right ahead. We're right here. I'm ready to click through as you're ready.
Okay, so get the fastest finger ready. Okay. I still remember new parent night in elementary school, when a parent worried her older child lacked the math classes to apply to a college STEM degree. In the next 5 minutes, I'll share what I wished I'd known back then, now that my daughter has completed her first year in college engineering. Next slide, please. These are my personal opinions based on my experience as a parent and my professional training. Next slide, please. I'll start with what I believe to be healthy goals and the thought distortions that sabotage them. Next slide. Whatever your child's goals, a strong basic math background is essential to keep your child's career options open as technology is transforming our world. Even as a psychologist, I found I needed statistics to understand my professional literature. Getting into an engineering college is highly competitive, and students need to complete BC Calculus in high school. But they don't need every AP class, just the right level of challenge to maintain good grades in subjects appropriate for their academic goals. They need to explore what they care about through extracurricular activities. Here are some examples for STEM students. My daughter loved robotics, and it brought her together with the community that inspired her to pursue mechanical engineering. This book, So Good They Can't Ignore You, powerfully demonstrates through case studies the importance of working hard to build valuable skills and a sense of competence over simply following your passion. Next slide, please. As a non-engineer, I was initially overwhelmed by my child's math curriculum. To help, I'll outline the math education life cycle in Palo Alto schools and how many families navigate it successfully. Whereas we're warned against homework in elementary school, most STEM parents supplement. Middle school is a battleground for student placement. Students start with ineffective mixed-level classes while parents supplement until their kids reach the right level of homogeneous classes. In the main pathway, students reach Algebra 1 in 8th grade, putting them on track for BC Calculus by senior year. Whereas this path keeps options open, struggling students often fall behind without extra support. Many students take geometry in 8th grade, leading to multivariable calculus in their senior year. This pathway will enable my daughter to take more specialized engineering classes in college. The California Math Placement Act has been vital for families because it requires a competent math assessment to guide placement upon entry to high school. Next slide. We all want to trust schools to do what's best, but especially in the early grades, it's important to monitor your child's math progress. You're not a tiger parent for requesting test scores or offering extra support. Equity shouldn't mean holding anyone back. Education isn't a zero-sum game. Schools should support both struggling and advanced students to reach their potential. Providing enrichment or acceleration isn't fueling an arms race, it's meeting your child's needs. Yes, high school can be stressful, but it builds the resilience students need for college and beyond. Above all, listen to your student with love and get professional mental health support if they show signs of serious depression or other mental illness. And here's a link. Next slide. When used ethically, placement tests tailor education to student needs, but in many districts, they're misused to detract students into ineffective mixed-level classes. Next slide. Standardized tests follow ethical principles like iReady and NWEA MAP, follow best practices in that they're reliable, valid, and have normative data on diverse student populations. Decisions around placement cut scores should also be valid and appreciate measurement error. Next slide. The science of math has great explanations and recommends assessment 3 times a year using rigorous tests. The National Center for Intensive Intervention is a great resource to learn about effective educational assessments. Next slide. Parent communities are extremely helpful. Next slide. Social chats like WhatsApp and WeChat that allows Chinese translation enable parents to share opportunities and coordinate advocacy, but beware that in large groups there are often people who take screen captures and share externally, so mind what you say. Next slide. And advocacy is important. Next slide. And this is the last one. Unfortunately, school administrations keep forcing these ineffective detract classes so that advocacy has been needed. There's an elected board of education that meets regularly to advocate for the community, especially students. You can speak privately to trustees and also during those meetings. And you're not a bad parent if you pursue a lawsuit. In Palo Alto, Avery Wang's and Edith Cohen's lawsuit to enforce the California Math Placement Act helped many students reach their potential and avoid repeating classes. And that's everything that I could cram into 5 minutes.
Boy, you just nailed that. Not only timeline, but content, Allyson. I mean, you really hit so many important things which are already been heard a bit from what Mani was just talking about, and just knowing kind of where we're going a little bit in this evening, that Michael and Sugi will hit on also, and literally have written articles on such topics. The one thing, unless there was anything else you wanted to add, you had an email address or a website in there that you cited. If you can, while we're moving on to our next set of the evening, if you can grab that and just drop it into the comments, and that way people will have it in there. And folks, again, who are there, I just see a question came in. Go ahead and drop questions, and we're going to collect them in just a little bit, and we will get to questions. But next up, we're going to have a presentation.
If you want to share my slides, you're welcome to, but I'll paste the websites.
Oh, that's
as
great.
Well.
That's great. If you, so right now put that up, and I'm going to figure out how we can share those slides. Okay. And if nothing else, through a follow-up through Navi, we can certainly post those slides too. Great. So let me go ahead and grab our next presenters, Mike Malione and Sugi Sorenson. And I'm going to grab your presentation as well and add that to the stage. Okay. Thank you so much. Gentlemen, whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Mark. I'm Sugi Sorenson, Director of Policy for the Institute for Math Instruction. Next slide. And what I'm going to discuss is the background on how students are doing in math in California. Then I'll attempt to explain a little bit about how things got so bad. And then Michael's going to take over to describe the current math landscape, as well as what's wrong with the California math framework, and then some suggestions on things you can do. Next slide. So this is showing, I'm going to look at two metrics. This is the national, what's called the NAEP, or you may have heard it also called the Nations Report Card, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. They have two long-term, or two tests that they administer. This is the short-term test that's done every 2 years. This is 8th grade mathematics. So the black line at the top is the US average for 8th graders. The gold line is California. This goes back to 2020. Couple of things to note: 10 points on the vertical scale equals about 1 year of learning, according to Tom Lovelace, well-regarded math researcher. So the scores don't change. As Allyson pointed out, this is a very rigorous and stable standardized assessment. So notice that there was slow, steady improvement on the national scale from 2020 to 2013. And then
2000.
I'm sorry, 2000 to 2013. Thank you, Michael.
Yep.
Notice the first thing is that there's a drop at 2013. So what that corresponds with between 2013 and 2015 is that's when Common Core was put in place nationwide. I believe it was about 45 states that adopted it. You have a slight recovery. And then there's a huge drop after 2019, and that's the policy response from COVID. The latest NAEP results from last year, everybody was hoping that we would start to recover, but unfortunately you can see scores dropped even further, both in California and nationwide. Next slide. This just looks at the California scores. There are 3 performance levels on the NAEP, NAEP Basic, Proficient, and Advanced. Next slide. The basic takeaway is that 3/4 of students are below proficient or advanced. Next slide. Whereas the NAEP uses a sampling technique, this is the CASP, the California Annual Assessment of Student Progress and Performance. So they have 4 performance bands. They test every public school student in grades 3 through 8, as well as grade 11. Next slide. Key thing here, if you've ever looked at your school or your district scores, they break it down by ELA and math. On the right, you see less than 1/3 of 8th graders are meet or exceed grade level standards. Next slide. So you can see that by 11th grade, that 1/3 of students has dropped to 28%. If you go to the next slide, so here I'm looking at just the top 2 performance bands on the CASP. And the red line is a regression line that shows that it starts out bad in 3rd grade, less than half the kids. And by the time you get to 11th grade, we're down to less than 1/4 of students are at or above grade level. Next slide. Your results may vary. I'm just going to show the range of scores. So this is the highest performing comprehensive high school in California. Lynbrook High in San Jose has 92% of their students in the top 2 performance bands. Next slide. And Lynbrook High is, as you can see, this shows the top 30 schools out of 2,131 public high schools in California. They're not even the top. There are also magnet and charter schools that are doing slightly better. Next slide. So at the bottom end of the range, 100 miles due east of Lynbrook High, in a rural county of Merced is Westside High. They have no students that are at or above grade level. And this is actually not uncommon. There are 316 other high schools, as well as county offices of education, that have no students at or above grade level. That's a full 15% of all the high schools in California. Next slide. So how did things get so bad? I'm going to cover this pretty quickly. Next slide. So as a reminder, by the NAEP measure, 3/4 of 8th graders are below proficient, a slightly smaller percentage of the CASP, and then we have this huge problem of students at the bottom who are underperforming. Next slide. So it would take way beyond the scope of this presentation to go over the whole timeline, but basically the launch of Sputnik by the Soviet Union in 1957 spurred a reform in math called New Math, where mathematicians basically rewrote the pre-college education that did not go well, that it lasted for less than a decade. We had back to basics. The key thing to note here is the 1980s. A national organization of math teachers called the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, or NCTM, instituted reforms which gutted basic math instruction. So many of the things that Mani talked about started during this era. Next slide. We'll share these slides afterwards so you can sort of see what the NCTM was recommending, but this is the source, I believe, of the current problems. They basically de-emphasize basic skills, procedural skills that Mark mentioned, in favor of what they said was problem solving and conceptual understanding. They believed that the ubiquitous availability of handheld calculators would eliminate the need to teach children how to do arithmetic, if you can believe that. That policy was a total disaster. And it had predictably negative results on both math performance on all measures that I've seen. Next slide. So these reforms that took place in the 80s de-emphasize basic skills. Many of the things Mani talked about, group-based learning, teachers not doing direct instruction, what's called constructivism or minimally guided instruction became the preferred approach to teach math. They removed calculus as the goal for most kids as far as pre-college mathematics, and this was the first time we saw social justice introduced as a goal of math. Next slide. So as would be predictable, if you know our legislature in Sacramento, California immediately adopted these very controversial standards in their 1992 math framework. And predictably, math instruction either plateaued or cratered depending upon which district and how far they went. This precipitated what is known as the math wars, where parents, mostly STEM professionals and professors in colleges, responded and fought against these reforms. You may recognize some of these curricula like Mathland or Everyday Mathematics. Two good things came of the math wars, though. One was we saw the private sector respond. So this was the first explosion in math tutoring centers, such as Kumon, Huntington Learning, Sylvan. Next slide. And then it was so bad that in 1997, they were developing standards in California. There were so many math errors in them that in Pete Wilson's administration, they asked for actual math professors, not math education professors, to rewrite the standards. The 97 standards were actually outstanding. They were judged independently by several organizations, including the Fordham Institute, as best in the country. One of the key features was what's called Algebra for All, which had all students attempt to take Algebra 1 by 8th grade. That was very successful. The number or percentage of students in California taking Algebra 1 by 8th quadrupled from 16% to 67%. Next slide shows those numbers and the performance bands. You can see that the numbers went up, the percentage of kids that were doing well. This is the Algebra 1 California Standards test. It's no longer used. Next slide. It had downstream positive effects. This shows the successful takers of AP Calculus A, B, and BC. An interesting thing to note here, this was a study done by Zev Warman and Bill Evers at the Independent Institute, that the success rate in calculus actually improved fastest amongst Black and Hispanic students, more so than amongst white and Asian. Next slide. And so this is my own research here. Here, higher numbers are worse. This is the math test that they give to every incoming freshman in the Cal State University system. And so if you fail it, you have to take remediation. So notice here, when the 1989 NCTM standards were put in place, the remediation rate was 24%. That more than doubled to a peak of 54% within 8 years. That's the period in yellow. And then once the 97 standards were put in, the remediation rate declined, things got better. And then next slide, for some strange reason, we reversed course. So this success from the 97 standards was wiped out by the adoption of the Common Core standards. There actually are explanatory reasons, primarily the recession of 2008. So the Obama administration dangled about $2 billion in grants to states that adopted nationally normed standards. So that enticed over 40 states to adopt a Common Core. Next slide. So you can see this is the percentage of students that are taking Algebra 1 by 8. So when Common Core was widely adopted by 2014, that rate plummeted. Went from 59% down to 19% within just a few short years. Next slide. NAEP scores, which had enjoyed slow, steady progress for the previous 13 years, suddenly reversed. Next slide. And that's where we wound up at the current state. So Michael's going to take over from here.
And I'm going to take over from here. And I am the co-founder of the Institute for Math Instruction. I'm also a school board member, as Mark mentioned. And I have to say that Sugi and I have both observed a lot of the things Mani was describing as well. So this is all very consistent. Mm-hmm. And so the current state of affairs, we've got so there's the two-tiered system. And what I'm going to say on that is students preparing for STEM fields really do need to go beyond what they're being taught in the classroom. It needs to start early. So when they're not being taught math facts or practicing calculations, to cement their understanding, and it's really understanding operations and getting that into long-term memory so that cognitively they can working memory. If you're familiar with cognitive load theory, they can focus on what they need to learn and not be all having to put all their attention to just being able to do the calculations for arithmetic that they should know cold at that point. So by cementing this understanding, that's been replaced with conceptual understanding, which is the way they focus it in the classroom, which doesn't really get you there. And I'll say more on why that is. So what they're being taught is irrelevant. And there's also been the adoption of curriculum like everyday math, which Sugi has written an article calling it Twinkie math. The idea here is when a district adopts a really bad core math curriculum, like everyday math, test scores may actually improve as an immediate consequence. And that's because more families see the need to seek outside supplement and find support. And then the students do better because the parents are doing the lifting, one way or the other, whether it's tutoring or teaching their kids at home. So now we've reached a point where the elementary school teacher is more trained in how to make the subject easier for struggling students and more engaging than in knowing what students actually need to learn and master to grow layers of proficiency so that they can actually get somewhere as the years progress. And the consequence of that is achievement gaps increase because families who can are compensating outside the school classroom. So that's the current state of affairs we have here now. Go to the next slide. This little chart shows you if you look at how well they perform, and those lines represent 90th percentile performers, 75th, and so on. This is on the TIMSS, a fourth grade math score. That's an international test that's been consistent. At least what's on the test has remained the same for decades. And the chart speaks for itself. In the 1990s, high-performing student scores dropped a bit, while those of the lower performing rose steadily. And we saw real gains between 2002 and 2010. which then level off and decline. And now, especially among lower performers, you can see post 2010, the lines in the bottom charts drop more quickly, steeper, especially in the last few years with the COVID era. And some debate, is it Common Core? Is it detracking? Is it cell phones? Because that 2012 time coincides with when students had, smartphones handy. But the COVID era really amplified it. And that's, both because of students not being in school and the hyperfixation on equity. So next slide. So even in high performing districts, this is happening. And I serve on the board in a high performing district, Piedmont Unified. We're in the top 3 in California, the top in Northern California. And I saw these measures put in force here starting about 10 years ago. Sugi saw a similar thing in his district, which is also one of the top performers, La Cañada, and over that same time period. So we're lucky to be in places where there's demand and supply for the supplementation I mentioned, but in neither place is the school district doing as much as it could. So the next slide. So now I'm going to talk about the California math framework, which this was sort of the wake-up call that I got in 2021. I had already had some experience teaching in the school. We're using a CPM curriculum that I realized was really subpar relative to the curriculum I had learned from when I was in school. And then we saw that this was going through. The first draft came out that year, and that's when Sugi and I kind of came together. I started Save Math, and a few people joined us. So the main highlight here I'm going to get to is emphasizing equity, but I want to just touch on all 4 here, even though I'm not going to expand too much on them. So the Common Core standards are split into 2 parallel realms. And this is A, resurrecting the failed practices. So there's content standards, which are the material you're supposed to know how to do. And there's practice standards, which basically are the incarnation from the NCTM 1989. The practice standards, they're called Standards for Mathematical Practice. They're more about habits and ways of working than about specific content skill. So there's that. The CMF, the California Math Framework, focuses more on how to ensure that classrooms are equitable than about the details of what needs to be taught. And when challenged about this, the promoters of it say, well, that's what the standards are for, to teach what needs to be taught. But everything in the CMF minimizes those standards, especially the content, undermines those aspects. It also disparages computational fluency down to C. Computation is what calculators and computers can do, so why bother? That's what they say. But the point of teaching computational theory is to lay the ground, computational fluency. You want them to learn the skills to be fluent. The reason to do that is to lay the ground for more difficult concepts. So you have that, like I said, the working memory before, not being spent on just trying to do the calculations. And that's where this fluency is needed in order to process and reflect upon the new material. So taking this to an extreme, why even bother having math class at all then? Because you don't really need to teach math. And really, when you see how the CMF writers approach this, it sounds crazy, but computers have gotten rid of the need to know math, so they think the time would be better spent poring over social justice related data. Usually data that's brought in with a theme, where the theme is compelling more so than the math. And then at the heart of these, inefficient and ineffective practices. It's a literal difference of opinion and beliefs about what math learning actually is. So it's a question of what math is, who's it for, that's being redefined. And what's lost in there is people who are going to go on to STEM, who really do need to know the math at a level that's not only deep, but also rigorous. And there's sort of this notion of, well, the computer does all that now, so why do we even need it? Next slide, please. And I need to pick up the pace here a little, I think. So except for a slight revision during the finalization in 2013, the standards haven't changed since 2010. The older math standards were much better, as Sugi mentioned. Common Core technically allows for teaching ahead, and you could implement things that worked in the old standards in Common Core, but it's a lot of extra work rather than the indicated path of least resistance. Next slide, please. So Here we have some of the weaknesses of the Common Core standards, problematic things that were inserted. And at the time Common Core was being rolled out between 2010 and 2013, a lot of doublespeak in the promotions and public relations around how these standards are the best thing since sliced bread, and they're really going to give the kids the conceptual understanding they need to do better. But that hasn't really borne out in the proficiency and in the testing that we've seen. Next slide. So the framework, when the standards first rolled out in 2013, there was a CMF. So that's the 2013 framework. It focused on explaining how to teach math under the then new standards. There was much focus on simply teaching math. So the problems that were in Common Core were less extreme, because the whole point of the framework was to teach math through that. The new standards push against all those recommendations that would help the existing standard be as effective as the older ones were. They impose a distinct vision of teaching math. It alters the subject to appreciation and engagement in ways that hobble the student from actually gaining proficiency. And so then this is just a little, next slide, please. This is just a little more background on the difference between standards and frameworks. It's often said the framework is the how and the standards are the what. And there's a lot of confusion around these two documents because, who keeps track of all these, right? Often you're like standards, framework, what? But the framework's official role is guidance regarding how to implement the standards. So how to make the standards happen in the classroom. And under Common Core, the how is really baked into the what. The standards say how as well as what. The what is defined in very vague terms that can more easily be altered as an artifact of how they're implemented. And so the how in this framework pushes toward really minimizing the what. And that's a problem. That's the problem. That's maybe the main problem that I see as far as the math in this is concerned. So next slide, please. So it's important to remember that the new framework is optional, but districts are under great pressure to follow it. Textbook publishers, county offices of education, California School Board Association, District Legal Council, the California Math Council, which is a group that promotes this approach, teacher unions, they all want to see it done this way, and they're putting pressure on the district. Next slide, please. So there are some strengths in the framework that the authors assert, about issues of inequity, meaning making, big ideas, why heterogeneous classrooms are better. You'll hear these arguments from many stakeholders, academics, teachers, administrators, politicians, even school board members in a lot of cases. Equity is at the center of it. There are arguments, but there are arguments against that equity from both the left and the right. From the left, it's just bad pedagogy. So rather than closing achievement gaps, it just makes them worse and alters what is measured so they're hidden. We saw that in some of the testing results that were presented earlier. And then from the right, closing the achievement gaps is this elusive and inappropriate goal. It takes energy away from ensuring that all students are taught effectively. And effective instruction is what causes students to do well, but it also grows gaps. So better to have the gaps grow because everyone's learning more than to be making the gaps, masking them, and then people are learning less. Those are the two sides to that. Next slide. Criticisms. So this is the how of what the CMF is doing wrong. It stresses instructional methods and pathways that hide learning differences. So those differences never get addressed. Those who could learn better won't. Those who are failing to learn will be assured that they're doing just fine and led along, socially promoted, even to the point of being told they're eligible for STEM careers when they're actually not. Next slide, please. So more criticisms here. This is a repeat of what happened in the 1990s and the 1989 NCTM standards. It's almost 30 years, just revisited. People forgot, and here it is again. Next slide. Lots of key things like rigor, fluency, acceleration. It's very big on D tracking, and it urges students to do data science in lieu of Algebra 2. But then data science is not really what they need as preparation for STEM. It's sort of just an alternative so that more students can be pushed along and be called UC eligible. Next slide. So it promotes equity by limiting achievement. The very nature of what is being covered and celebrated as knowing math is altered to accommodate the practices. So rubrics are built around wordy explanations, being able to describe multiple ways of approaching, and phrasing that appeals to teacher biases rather than working effectively and accurately toward a correct answer. So it's all a lot more subjective. The grades tend to be a lot more B's and C's, fewer A's, D's, and F's, especially when you look at some of the new grading practices. So I'm a little behind, but in the few, I'll just quickly do, what can you do? Take responsibility for your child's math education. Be very clear that they're not going to learn what they need to in school and plan accordingly. Find out what math curriculum is being used. This can help you to understand what is and isn't covered well and what support will be needed. It also helps you to rate how wise your district's leaders and staff are. C, advocate for better materials when they come up for adoption. We at IMI are working on materials and a playbook to help people in districts have better success with this. It's a work in progress as we support our own districts, and that's how we're forging the way. And D, educate your school board and cabinet on the problems, volunteer and run for school board. I know this is the real heavy lift. It's a lot of volunteer work, but it's continuing on C, it requires understanding and buy-in from many parties. So it's just be as involved as you can and work to get the hearts and minds of people to realize that the PR may not be accurate and to see why and really understand that, because there's glossy presentations that the textbook publishers will say, look at how great this is, and it's real easy to fall for them. Next slide. So these are just kind of the summary of these points of what you can do. Find out what's being taught. Talk to your teachers and board. We're developing resources to help with much of this that will be on our IMI website. Ratings and guides about which curriculum work, which ones don't, how to get the most from any one of them. So whatever your district adopts, you have a plan. Information to help you understand pathways and warning signs and how to do skip tests to make sure you move ahead as much as you can in your progression. Supplemental math and math enrichment. I think you all know these firms. I could mention Art of Problem Solving, Russian
Next
School.
slide, Mark.
Yeah.
Next slide. So there we go. And then textbook adoptions. Parental input is usually provided for, some states more than others. It's just, this is something to keep your eye on, because if you just leave it to the experts, you'll find the results are going to be less than mediocre. And I think, is that our last one, right?
I think we might have a couple more slides if you want me to click through.
Yeah, go ahead to the next one. I think this is just thank you. Sugi, do you want to add anything to the part I did before we open for questions?
I think we're a little behind, so we should just open it up to questions.
Yeah, great. And I'm going to add Allyson, and you're going to come back on stage, and Manny, we're putting you on back as well. Everybody, thank you so much for your presentation. I mean, this was the right idea. This is exactly what we were looking for, right? We get in the class with Manny, we have the parent that experience, and the two of you, Michael and Sugi, what you have put together with that presentation is, and I can also see by how many people are staying in and watching, we're hanging in there with you, because that was a lot of material, really good. If there's any way, Allyson, both your presentation and Michael and Sugi, yours, that our viewers can find and get online. If not, I'll have them, we can upload, or we can navigate distribution through Navi as well. But I think what's so important here is what we want to do, and this is part of Navi's task, and what you guys are up to also, which is assess what's going on. Yes, how did we get here? What do we do? And this role of parents is very, very important. So I will say, part of what prompted this evening was I had, there's this movie that's been kind of working its way through some movie theaters and schools and different things. It's called Counted Out. And I went to see it in a local high school, and it was introduced, the principal of the high school was introducing and talked about this whole idea of math identity, which is that was a new term for me. It's evidently how has math, or a math experience, presumably a negative one, how has that shaped your kind of identity and who you are? And math is shown in this film, or the way I took it anyway, is really that math can be used to segregate our society, to hold people back, to serve as a gatekeeper to higher success, and that math is a type of racism or classism. So what do you make of that kind of assessment because that seems to be part of the ideology that undergirds this change and a push to make math more equitable, as opposed to helping all of our students? And we need a society for a good America. I believe we need people literate and numerate, and how to get. So can one of you want to grab that and run with that for a minute?
Michael, why don't you've actually seen, and we're on a panel.
Yeah, I have seen the film. We actually
great.
had a screening in our district, and I arranged for a panel. So what I'll say about this film, it's the idea is that math is a gatekeeper, and so it's sort of posed as it isn't really testing or building a relevant skill. It's just kind of forcing people to jump through hoops so that they can be separated, and that's the vision that. There's a few visions in the film, but that's the one I think you were speaking to. And I'll just say, like, when we had the film come to our district, I did some research because there are some people who have math phobia, and they get this very bad self concept after struggling in math. And in our district, it's actually under 5%. It's like 3.5% of the students. And I mean, I think the answer to that is you need to be taught well in the early stages, and you need to have the right intervention so that's nipped in the bud. And not everyone's going to become a STEM professional. And there are ways to make the class more interesting for people who aren't. But that's really not what the proposals in that film are aiming toward. They're really kind of building up this idea that math should be open to everyone so they can participate in society. And they don't understand that the way they want to open up the math will render everybody incapable of being able to participate in the math at that level. They'll just be, thinking about how to apply the math using other skills. So that would be my answer.
Great. We just had unless somebody else wanted to grab it, we had a question from someone who's watching this evening, Joe Nalvin. What happens when we add AI into the mix?
Yeah, I can take a shot at that. So to quote one of my favorite economists / philosopher, Thomas Sowell, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. So from what I've seen from the large language models in AI, there are benefits to it. There are many entrepreneurs, including Elon Musk, that think that AI and LLMs are going to revolutionize the math instruction. But I would say beware. At least once or twice a week, I test some of the higher order math problems on all 3 of the major LLMs to see, and about half the time it gets them wrong. So they're not perfect. They're definitely, it all depends on what you're comparing it to. They're definitely better than, let's say, a group instruction class where the teacher doesn't do any teaching. You can actually learn much of the math if you use the LLMs, particularly ChatGPT. But at the same time, there are negative sides to it as well. So from what I've heard from college professors, and maybe Manny can speak to this, students, if given the opportunity, will just massively cheat with it. So teachers have to up their game as far as making sure that students don't just abuse this tremendous new power that's available to everyone.
I don't allow calculators at all. So I think that was probably the first way back in, 50, 60 years ago, where that was going to be a major issue. So for me, all my students, they do everything by hand because they were moving away to, what was that? Desmos, trying to graph. And a lot of the kids, they were graduating from high school without knowing how to graph a line or how to plot a point. So everything is done by hand. And I tell the students I have to do this, that I want to see the steps done in the way we learn them in class. Because some kids will, go in and type math problems online, and they come in with steps that I know that it was a little bit too advanced for them to be able to do that. And so that's one of the ways that I work around that.
I don't hear Mark.
Yeah, it's because I was muted. I'm, like I said,
Yeah.
Is my computer frozen? No, it's good.
no,
Okay.
you're good. You're good. Go ahead.
I know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. We got
I
you.
just lost sound. That's weird. Oh, wait, hold on. There. Okay, it's back. Sorry. Okay, so I noticed a question earlier Phoebe had about heterogeneous instruction. Manny, did you want to take that one?
We answered it in the chat as
okay.
well.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically, when you have a mixed class, each kid doesn't get what they need. And my daughter experienced that, where they had kids programming in the back of the class, and the kid in the front is misbehaving because they're lost. And the kids who are, sort of in the middle are just kind of feeling like they're not being addressed. It's really frustrating, and it really sabotages kids. I also wanted to say that we just don't know what the future is going to be. And so you have one shot at getting a solid basis in math that's like a scaffolding for later. And then what we're finding is that the more tools we have, the more innovation. And so why wouldn't you give a solid framework? Why would you hold certain kids back when innovation is what drives our economy and our society? It makes no sense.
How do you guys know if you're a parent and you want to know, how do I know if my kid's school is in trouble, or if this is happening? What would you advise parents?
If your school, this should go to all the young parents who have kids that are gonna go into school. First grade, second grade, they should be teaching them times tables. The stuff that we learned way back when we were kids. If you see them bringing home shape, identify the shape, what's going to be the next shape, sort of this, I don't know, these weird problems that have nothing really to do with computational stuff, you should be concerned. Because like I said, I get ninth graders who come in and they cannot add and subtract. I'm able to bridge the gap, by the way, because I don't follow along with what the school is wanting me to. So I'm able to get kids I taught a pre-geometry. So these are kids who should have passed algebra, and they were going to take pre-geometry because they were sort of remedial level. And I was able to get them. They did not know how to add and subtract. Even after getting out of algebra at my high school, I was able to get them to add and subtract. And eventually, by the end of the school, they were doing geometry, full-on geometry. Because I did not use calculators, very structured, direct instruction. The desks are in rows, traditional way. Now they want them in clusters. And I was able to do that. I forgot what the question was, but
it was just how does a parent know if things have gone off track?
Oh, yeah, right from the very beginning. If the school isn't teaching just the basic elementary math, I would be concerned, because now you're going to have to do that.
So is there some of you? I don't know if it's on one of your websites or not, and I do want to hit one of these questions that just came up. Also, where people can learn a little bit about, how do I know, what are the basics that my kids should know X by fourth grade, fifth grade, where those kind of stands are, so that I know that they'll be on track to do Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Is there a website you guys can recommend, or some of your articles I know that speak out some of the standards?
Well, I'd say the first thing in the early years is just when you see what they're working on, keep an eye on it and see that they're doing things you remember, as far as being able to have the fluency. Because the most important thing in grades K to 4 is coming into 4 with the fluency, so that they're ready to deal with fractions and understand fractions. Okay. And then from there, it's a matter of exposure to algebra that happens to the concepts that I'm trying to think of the answer to that part of it, of how can you tell, gearing them up for most districts will have some sort of a point of entry into middle school where there's a challenge test, and usually a compressed path, a way that you can move a little faster to make sure you get to algebra. And make sure you do that earlier, because it's easier to move faster when they're younger than it is in high school and make it up. Some will say, oh, let's make up the time in high school, but that's just a lot harder to do.
It's harder to do. Listen, even Harvard, we just saw this year, implemented or designed with increased number of remedial math classes, or that they were offering some of their students that simply don't have it. They didn't get it in high school, which means right? So it's a systemic issue in that regard. There was a good conversation that's going on. I just see in the chat about this idea of heterogeneous classroom.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it sounds really nice, and on the there are downsides to it. It's important to recognize that. Any other closing points or things that people wanted to mention before we start to close off our hour? Folks who are watching online, if you want to drop another comment or question in, feel free to do so.
I was going to add, just to give you a sense of how bad it is, there are 6th and 7th graders who, if you ask them what is 34 minus 8, they can't do that. Like, they really struggle with it still. A fair number of them. I mean, not in our districts, but kind of like some of the people we work with are in more kind of regular districts. And this is like a widespread problem. That's just an example to me of how ineffective what's being done is.
Look, for a lot of us who are, soon to reach dinosaur age, I can remember in my, in my early jobs in high school and then in college, having to make change, right? And really being able to count back money. So knowing those basic concepts, which thankfully grew up in California, I had a good school system. I know that I needed some extra help along the way. And thank God I was able to get that. But we have to have those elementary skills because other things build on top of that.
And these concepts are supposedly being taught. So the question is, why aren't they landing?
We just had someone drop
another issue that you have is, so this ideology has been deep rooted for a long time. So what happens if you have a teacher such as myself? The reason how I got in was because I was a computer teacher. I was nowhere on the radar. Now, if you come into the school system, they're going to weed you out and they're going to get rid of you. So only people who believe in what they think and feel whatever are the people who actually get tenure. And so it is really deep rooted now. You can't have anybody who's conservative minded in a public school. I imagine it was probably even worse in a university. I'm not sure, but we have to do it from the grassroots, from the parents. The parents are the key here. All the young parents. There should be hundreds of young parents in these seminars and webinars trying to find out what they can do.
And so that's part of why this program, thank God, it gets to live on, on our platforms. And this information has been so helpful. And it's giving what's happened so much that we're seeing, especially in younger teachers, is that teaching has become activism as opposed to just teaching. And giving the students the skills that they have so that those kids can later in their life be whatever activists and take on whatever topics that they decide are important to them. As we say in Yiddish, sei gesund, they should go on in good health. But in school, when you're in the 3rd grade, learning your multiplication tables and making sure that you can memorize them, that's important. That's not an issue of anything other than math and numbers and the importance therein. I want to just say we will also make sure to follow up on some of our posting related information to this topic. But unless there are other comments, I'm going to close this out for the night with a big thank you. Unless there was anything that I just see on the screen. No? Okay. Friends, thank you all for joining us today. Mani and Allyson and Sugi and Michael, how grateful the North American Values Institute is for having you on this program, and more broadly speaking, for the writing and the teaching and the advocacy that you offer and are doing. In a world where numbers need to add up and we need to have the skills to add them without a calculator always, your modeling and guiding for students and parents, let alone teachers and administrators, is critical. Obviously, paying attention to our students matters. If you are not currently a subscriber or follower of the North American Values Institute, please check out our website and social media. You can find us at Navi, N-A-V-I, Values. You are all smart people online and watching. You can find us. So if you also are inclined to support our work, the donate button is only too ready to receive your generosity so we can keep our institute and conversations and teachings like this meaningful, relevant, and most importantly, present and available. So again, many thanks to our panelists on this night. I wish everyone a good night.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.